Hi guys, welcome back, or welcome if this is your first video that you're watching of mine. Today, as you probably saw in the title, we are going to be reading books in genres that I don't typically gravitate towards, or I don't typically read. That is not to say that I've never read a book in that genre. That's just to say that I don't normally reach for that kind of book. So I don't own very many books in genres that I don't read often. My main genres that I'll read are mystery, thriller, romance, and fantasy / romantasy. So those are not the genres we're going to be reading today. I also am using my makeup mirror as a light because the lighting right here specifically is just terrible, but it's kind of working, so we're just going to go with it. So the first book that I'm reading for this video, which I have already started, is The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. This one is, I've talked about this in my September TBR video, but this is the prequel novel to a book I read for school called Sea of Tranquility. That book was honestly so good. She's kind of a mastermind, honestly, because you'll start her books thinking like, oh, this is interesting, and then it'll switch perspectives and you're like, why are we in this new perspective? How is it going to connect back? But as you keep reading, everything starts tying together in the craziest of ways, and it just gets really good. And I'm hoping that this one will have a really good message like the other one did. I'm already sensing some themes. I will say this book doesn't really have one genre, I think. She kind of just writes whatever she wants. It's kind of literary fiction-esque, but there's usually some sort of sci-fi-ish element. So far, have not seen any sci-fi-ish elements, but she does talk a lot about the concept of time, as well as the idea of belonging and what does it mean to be successful and feel fulfilled and that all that kind of stuff. But it's written in a very just you're following these people in their lives type of way. I am currently on page 82, so I'm about a quarter of the way through. This book does have chapters, but here, this is the contents page. So there's sections. There's part 1, part 2, and part 3. And then within some of the chapters, there's little sections. For example, the chapter I'm reading right now, which I believe is chapter 5, is separated out into little vignettes, if you will, and they're all labeled. So this one's poolside. There's also The Investor. There's one called Morella. There's one called Shadow. There's one called Shield. So they're all kind of just little snippets of time. They're chronological, but they're not, one does not lead into the next. It's kind of you read one and then the next one is just a different moment in the future, a little bit further into the future of what's going on at that moment in time. So yeah, I'm very interested to see where it goes. So far I've just been annotating with a highlighter and a pen, and I'm really vibing with it. I'm also just very curious to see where it goes, honestly, because like I said, it is interesting right now, but as I keep reading, it'll definitely start connecting more dots and it'll get really good. So excited about that. Other than that, I have one other book planned out for this video, and the third one will kind of play by ear. So yeah. is now much later. I've made a lot more progress into this book. I'm now at page 192, so almost page 200. I'm at chapter 2 of part 3, which is called Winter. Yeah, I've been enjoying it so far. I feel like it's really interesting to see how all these parts are connecting and to see new parts coming up and things are kind of starting to be explained. I love her writing. It feels very poignant in a way, and I feel like she just does a very good job of drawing connections between things, even in small ways. Like, she'll describe something and then connect it to something else in one sentence, and you just feel like that sentence is so, it just feels very, not to use the same word twice, but poignant. But if you were to describe it to someone else, it wouldn't make sense without the story that was told before it. And I feel like she just does a really good job with that, and she just has a really interesting way with words and way of describing things. For example, there's one part of this book where there are two characters and they're meeting each other for the first time, and it's discussed a lot how one character sees the other person as some person in this situation, and the other character sees first person as an opportunity. And she doesn't just come out and say that, she basically just writes an opportunity, like a person meets an opportunity, and then goes to the other person's perspective as like a person meets another person, and it just really makes you think. That probably sounded really stupid when I explained it because I'm just doing a really bad job of explaining this, but it's hard to explain. You just kind of have to read it to know. I will say, I think Sea of Tranquility was more immediately engaging than this because there were so many aspects, mysterious aspects about it. I also would probably recommend reading Sea of Tranquility before reading this one, just because you get a lot of other stories in Sea of Tranquility that relate to this, that make you feel like there is a mystery to be solved within this story. But I think if you read this book first without the context of what happened in Sea of Tranquility, you would not be totally hooked by anything happening, because it just kind of feels like she's going through a sequence of events and exploring a series of characters, which is true and is very thought-provoking. But in order to feel like there is some element of mystery, you do kind of have to read Sea of Tranquility, and there's a lot of things that are explained in that book that make this very interesting. So yeah, I feel like the backs of her books also explain a mystery really well in a way that the book itself doesn't, almost, to the point where you kind of need the context for the story before you read the actual story that she's written, because the context is not very well written in the story, if that makes sense. It jumps around time periods a lot and different perspectives and experiences, so to kind of understand what's going on, it does help to have the background from Sea of Tranquility, just to preface this. But I am thoroughly enjoying it. It's not something I would typically read, and if I hadn't read Sea of Tranquility and enjoyed it so much for school, I probably would not be reading this. And I really only finished Sea of Tranquility because it was for school. I think if I started it, I probably would have finished it, but I don't know that I would have enjoyed it as much as I did without all the discussions that we had about it. And I feel like it's similar with this book. There's a lot of things that I wonder that I wish there was someone to ask me a thought-provoking question about it, because on my own I see that line and I'm like, ooh, that's interesting, and then I'll underline it, but I won't really fully get the meaning or the significance of it without talking to someone else about it. And as far as I know, nobody else is currently reading this book, so kind of hard to talk to someone about a book that they're not reading, especially one that's as confusing as this. Well, not confusing, I say confusing, that's the wrong word. Plot-wise confusing. So if I tried to explain this to someone and then talk to them about the meaning of it, it would just right over their head. But if you read it and you talk to someone about it who's also reading it, it just enhances the experience, in my opinion. So that's kind of my assessment so far. I am excited to finish. I'm probably, like, I want to say 60% of the way through, maybe 70. I'm guessing about a third left of the book, so Yeah, and I'm excited to get to the end because as much as I feel like the different people's plots in this book are connecting in certain ways, I'm excited to see how they really weave together to create a greater message by the end. That's what I'm expecting to happen, just because that's how her last book went, and I don't know what that message is going to be, so it's not like ruining the element of surprise for me that I know that that's probably going to happen, but that's just kind of my expectation, and I'm excited to see that happen at the end of this book. So that is kind of my assessment so far, and I will come back to you probably when I finish this, because I've just basically been binging this. I've read it in 2 sessions so far and read about a third of it in each session, so I'm thinking I'll probably finish the next time I read it, and I will give you guys my final thoughts, and we'll see if I'm right about the ending being very significant and themed and having a big message. I finished The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. I was totally right and just binged the rest of it once I got the time to, and honestly I don't really know how I feel about it. I will say Sea of Tranquility, the ending felt like it kind of hit more, almost like the message of it really like gets you right at the end. With this one, I feel like the message and the story is more of like a slow burn situation, think of each portion of this book, each chapter or mini chapter if you will, as a puzzle piece. As the puzzle kind of slowly comes together, the message slowly comes together as well, and so there's no big like reveal at the end. It's just like you feel like it was there all along, but you also didn't know it when you started, if that makes sense. So because of that, I don't really know how to feel about it, because I think I kind of personally prefer a big message reveal kind of at the end, and this book is definitely one that you have to sit and think about it for a while to fully grasp everything that's going on and to fully feel the message of it. But I found it really interesting. It's definitely a story about how people's lives intersect, how one thing can affect so many, how people can do bad things and still be normal people and still feel like they're maybe a good person who just made a mistake, even if they did something really bad, like that kind of thing. And I think that's just so intriguing. It's also a story about regret, about, you know, finding happiness versus being successful, and all of those themes just were very interesting to me, and I personally enjoyed reading about them. However, I feel like you kind of have to sit and think on it to really get the message of the book that it's trying to tell you. Like after I finished this, I literally spent probably 30 minutes on my phone reading other people's reviews on Goodreads just to process everything. Like I genuinely felt like I needed to talk to someone about this book, but it's, like I said, it's hard to explain the book to someone who hasn't read it because it's just so complex, and part of the beauty of the story is the writing, and it's just amazing. I definitely can't rate this right now. Normally I can have a rating like a day or two later. This one, it's gonna take me like a little while to get a rating for, because I just need to, you know, yeah, that made total sense, but that's really where my headspace is about this book right now. I also love the cover and the title. It kind of, you don't realize it and it's not a big theme at the time, but the Glass Hotel is kind of where all of these different people's lives crossed, and it's just so interesting to me. Also, will say the mystery that I was talking about that's from Sea of Tranquility is solved in this book, so if you really, really want to know what happens, you can go ahead and read this and you'll get it. But yeah, I don't know. I thought it was just very, very interesting. In terms of the next book for this, I am not sure what I want to read yet. While reading The Glass Hotel, I'm also just in the middle of Mile High, and I'm probably like 60-something% of the way through, so I kind of want to finish that first before I jump into something else. But I am thinking of starting One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. I know this is fantasy, and that is one of my more read genres, and I know I'm supposed to be reading genres that I'm not familiar with, but from what I've heard, this is like a gothic fantasy. And I've read dark academia before, but I've never read something that's gothic specifically. So I kind of want to include this in this video just because I don't really know what it's gonna be like. And I feel like it's gonna be different from other fantasies I read. I could be wrong, but we may as well start it together. So once I finish Mile High, I'll jump into One Dark Window and I'll give you some updates on this as I go along, and we'll talk more about it. As you guys saw, I started One Dark Window. I did finish Mile High, so I jumped into this today. I got to page 174 so far, so I'm a little less than halfway through. I'm about like, I want to say 20 pages away from half. This is the halfway point, so I'm pretty close to getting to halfway. I've basically just binged the whole first half of this. It's honestly really good so far. I don't really know what I was expecting, but at the same time, this book is fulfilling every single one of my expectations somehow. I don't know. I do kind of see why people call it a gothic fantasy, but to me, it honestly just feels like any other fantasy. I think it's just the writing style is written a bit more gothically. I don't really know how to explain it very well. Basically, the content and the plot and everything does not feel very atmospherically gothic, but I feel like the writing doesn't emanate the same vibe that most other fantasies with plots like this usually have. For example, this is not to say the plots are similar, but like the concept, like this is very much giving fantasy with some romance in it, which other fantasies also have romance in them. Sarah J. Maas, obviously, this is not written like that. Fourth Wing, this is also not written like that. This is an adult one, so obviously it's not written in a YA style, but vibe-wise, it feels very similar to me to Heartless Hunter, even though it has nothing to do with witches. I just like the vibes and the time period. I mean, I know it's fantasy, so it's obviously not set in our world, but at the same time, it's also kind of set in like an older time period. Like people are courting each other, there's a king, there's fancy dresses and events and the whole shebang. But I'm really enjoying it so far. I've kind of just been eating it up slowly. It's very interesting. I have not really felt the need to annotate. I do have tabs for it, like you saw, but I didn't really write anything or tab anything yet. I might at the end if things get really crazy, but I'm kind of just enjoying the writing and enjoying the story, and I feel like there's not many tab-worthy quote moments necessarily, because everything that she writes is written in the same, like, almost beautiful lyrical way. I need to put that down. But yeah, I'm really enjoying it. I don't think this was really that much outside of my genre comfort zone, but I honestly probably would not have picked this up otherwise. So yeah. The interesting thing to me about this though is it has all the makings of a YA, because the main character she's not necessarily a teenager, like she's at least 18, definitely. She's probably like 20, which I feel like would make it YA kind of. Like, I could see how someone could write this in a YA style and not change anything about the plot or the characters or their ages or anything. But she chose to not do that, which I found interesting. I was also describing the plot of this to my dad with, like, the magic system with the cards and the, like, plague thing, and she has some monster in her head. Like, those were all things I knew going into the book before I started the book. Those, like, they're all in the back and stuff. And he was saying that it sounds very similar to The Stand by Stephen King, so if you like that book and you want a fantasy, why not? But I've never read it, so I could not tell you how similar they are. But yeah, I have been really enjoying this. I don't have necessarily the urge to completely and totally binge this. Like, I'm not on the edge of my seat needing to know what the very next word is, but I at the same time don't want to put it down, if that makes sense. So I'm not, like, if I'm not reading it, I'll think about, like, oh, I kind of want to pick it up again, but I'm not needing to pick it up again, but I want to. So I do want to continue it, and I do feel the need to read it, but I don't feel like there's anything crazy cliffhangers or anything happening. I just am very intrigued and really enjoying the story and everything. Let's talk about it, shall we? Literally ignore the backlighting too. I know this is like such a weird filming spot, but this book, I don't really know how I feel about it, to be honest. I prefer a fantasy that has a good plot twist at the end, and I feel like this didn't really have a great plot twist necessarily. Because of that, I don't think it doesn't really give me a 5-star or anything. Like, at the end of a book, I want to be jaw on the floor, like, you know, but this one didn't really give that vibe to me, so I'm just not sure how much I like it necessarily. I'm tentatively giving it a 4.25 stars, but I might lower that a little bit or upper it or raise it a little bit. We'll see. But I love the magic system of this. I love the premise. I love the way things were unfolding. I just don't really love the pacing necessarily, and I don't love the end. I feel like even though things should have felt like a big deal and like really stressful, they're written in such a way that makes me feel like they're very like chill. Things are moving pretty slow, like not super important when it is super important. And because of that, I just, you know, I don't really know if I loved this. It definitely was unique, in my opinion. It's not like anything else I've necessarily ever read in terms of the magic system and some of the concepts of the story, but honestly, for being as hyped up as it was and for me being as excited about it as I was a little bit disappointed. And maybe that's my own fault for getting my hopes up about it and just expecting it to be something that it wasn't, but I just feel like it disappointed me a bit. That's not to say it's a bad book. It's actually, like, it was a really good book and it was a solid read. I just don't feel like it hit as hard as I thought it would have for me. and it just wasn't a 5-star for me personally. So yeah, but in terms of the story and the characters, I loved all the characters. I loved the story. I loved some of the lines. The writing was very hauntingly beautiful, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I also love some of the art that they have in this book, like at the beginning. I'll show you from the beginning because I don't want to spoil anything, but at the beginning of each chapter there's a little card with a little blurb that's from a book that's important in this world, and I loved that about it. There's also, like I said, there's cards, like decks of cards that are a big part of the magic system. There's a little art of one of them in the back, the Twin Alders card, which beautiful. There was a lot of trees in this world. Like essentially there's the court, and each house in the court, or like family basically in the court, their last name is named after a tree. So there were a lot of trees thrown around. Trees were important in this book as well. But yeah, I found it to be a very interesting read, very unique magic system. I thought it was a fun time. I don't necessarily think that I would say this is my favorite fantasy ever, or it, in my opinion, for me, it's not that high up there, and but it's solidly in the middle of the fantasies that I've read, so I'd recommend reading it if you're interested in it. Just don't expect it to be anything like something you've read before, and if you want something that has really good, crazy, plot twisty ending, I don't think I would recommend this for that. So yeah, overall, I feel like every step of the story, even though it's supposed to feel like unexpected and surprising, just felt predictable. Even though I didn't predict it happening, it just felt like it was always going to happen, if that makes sense. So nothing about it felt surprising, even though some of the things should have been surprising. It just feels like the story was building up in such a way that that specific element made sense for, it made sense that that would happen. Overall, that's my assessment. I will definitely talk more about this at my rating. I will say it obviously is a fantasy, and it does feel like just any fantasy, so I don't think it is very genre unique. Even though people describe it as being a gothic fantasy, I don't really get that vibe from it necessarily. But then again, I've also never read a gothic fantasy before, so maybe gothic fantasy is just not that different from normal fantasy, and I'm just was expecting it to be something else. But yeah, I don't think I would say this is any different from your average fantasy, and it was a little bit disappointing, especially for the concept of this video to be getting me out of my reading comfort zones. This book did not really do that, so kind of a failed moment there with that one. But that's all I'm going to say about it for now. I'm going to think more on it, and obviously in the wrap up at the end you'll get my full review and my final thoughts after mulling over it a bit. So One Dark Window aside, the next book that I'm going to be reading for this video, also probably the last book I'll be reading for this video, is The Ministry of Time, which I've just heard really good things about. It's her debut novel. It's supposed to be like literary / speculative fiction, but also sci-fi. So I'm intrigued to learn more about the story and to read it. Like I said, I've heard a lot of good things. I've been recommended this book by a couple people, so we'll jump into it and we'll see what I think. Hi guys. Ignore literally everything about me because I'm just in my cozy mode, which is not very cozy because it's like 75 degrees in here. Probably not 75. It's like 70 degrees in here, so it's kind of hot. So I'm wearing a tank top and I'm wearing shorts. We're just not going to talk about it. I also was just listening to music and I just have my hair up. I'm a mess. We're just not going to talk about it. Okay. I just wanted to update on Ministry of Time. I took off the dust jacket, but honestly love the font on this. Just side note, it's kind of giving textbook, but like in an aesthetic way, which I appreciate. If we can't tell, I'm in a weird funky mood right now, so that's definitely gonna come into this review. Or not review, but update. I just got to page 31, which is the start of chapter 2. As far as I can tell, okay, let me back it up for a second. So this book is about the narrator who, as far as I can tell, is never named in the story. She might be at the end, but where I am right now, her name's never mentioned. She basically gets a job as someone who is going to, she's basically, say someone flees their country, they're a refugee, she would host them at her house, except they're not fleeing their country, they're taken out of their time period where they're about to die and instead put into the modern day. It's set in the UK in London, so it's, you know, neither here nor there, whatever. But yeah, so the guy she's with, his name is Graham Gore. He was a captain, so they refer to him a lot as Captain Gore. She calls him Gore, I think. He's the one that's staying with her, and he's from like the 1800s or something, like the 18 somethings. So he obviously is adjusting to life in the 21st century. Every single chapter basically has a snippet of before he died, like during his life, something that happened, and then those are labeled with Roman numerals. There's like 1, which is the very start of the book, and then I'm at 2 right now, and then there's chapters which are numbered with not Roman numerals, just chapter 1 and chapter 2 and so on. So those are all about, they're in the woman's perspective, like the host, his host family, I guess, her perspective, and about her relationship with him, his progress in adjusting, and yeah, that's kind of it. That's what's going on, I guess. I do have quite a few tab colors going on here because the cover has basically every color of the rainbow, and I just picked out a whole bunch, and so far I've used all of them except for the yellow one because I don't know what I want that to mean yet. We'll figure that out as we go. But all that to say that I have been tabbing a lot of stuff. I love the writing of this book. I have a tab dedicated to just really nicely arranged paragraphs, and then I have a different tab dedicated specifically to similes because she's the master of similes and I love a good simile. Maybe that makes me a word nerd. I don't care. I just love it. Do you want an example? Because you're getting an example. That night I slept with unpleasant lightness, my brain balanced on unconsciousness like an insect's foot on the meniscus of a pond. Like, hello? How do you think of these things? Like, genuinely, how do you come up with these comparisons? I'm just speechless because it's so good. His dimples notched his cheeks like a pair of speech marks. Need I say more? Because I don't think I do. Even though I would like to, I'm not going to because you're probably bored right now and I am just in love with the writing. So, yeah. That's honestly my update so far. It feels very happy, the happy songs of, not like happy, but like, you know, the happy songs of folklore. So like The Lakes, Peace, Cardigan, kind of, that kind of vibe. Like not her screaming rage songs from folklore and not her depressive crying songs, but the like peaceful, nice vibes. I feel like I'm making no sense. If you listen to folklore, you know what I'm talking about. Because that's how the vibes of this are feeling. They're feeling very like chill, peaceful, interesting. Yeah. Also, as far as I can tell, there are some themes of like immigration because the main character's mom was an immigrant and so she looks white but is ethnically not white. And so that's also touched upon a little bit in the story, and I think that's gonna be a bigger theme as the story continues, which is something else that I found really interesting that I kind of relate to a little bit because I'm half white and half Asian. My mom immigrated from her home country when she was a kid, so she's technically an immigrant and I'm not, and I feel like because I'm half white, I kind of look white-ish. I don't know. Don't ask me to explain it, but I relate to that. So that's kind of my whole update. I would go look at it but I was playing it on my computer, and my computer is literally the source of light that's on my face right now because the lighting in this corner is disgusting. Like, yeah. But I found a playlist for Ministry of Time. I can link it. It's not my playlist. I just looked up Ministry of Time on Spotify and like clicked on literally the first playlist I saw, but the vibes of it are really nice, so would recommend giving it a listen if you're reading this book. And yeah, that's kind of all of my thoughts so far, which is kind of a lot of thoughts, but that's okay. You know, whatever. It is also getting late. I say late, but I'm literally a grandma. It's 10 right now. I want to try to go to bed at 11, even though I don't have anything tomorrow, just because that's when I normally go to bed, and that's when I'll probably be tired. Also just because I'm recovering from being sick. Like I said, a few days ago I was feeling a little under the weather, and because I hadn't been sleeping well this past week due to the heat. But last night I was zonked out. Great night of sleep, hoping for another great night of sleep tonight. So, will say one downside of this book so far is that the chapters are pretty astronomically long. The first one was 30 pages, but I believe the rest of them are longer. There's only like 4 or 5 chapters in the whole like almost 350 page book. Yeah, the next chapter is like 40 pages. So they're not short chapters by any means. However, there are a lot of line breaks. Like this page, for example, there's a line break here and there's a line break here. And those are kind of breaks in like time, obviously, where it's later they're doing something else, or you know, so it feels like a collection of snippets of moments in time as the two of them are bonding and he's learning more about the world. That does make the story feel like it moves a lot faster than it does, and does keep it more compartmentalized, if you will. Also, he's kind of a silly, goofy guy, and I love that for him. That's just, you know, side note. His jokes are pretty silly, and his worldviews, not worldviews, that's not really what it is. It's like his demeanor, very silly, and I just love that about him. So, long story short, I'm enjoying the book. Good writing. This is her debut novel. That's insane. We'll continue, and we'll continue to update. So, I will definitely be reading you guys more similes before the end of this video, so if you hate similes, there's a door. That's really all I have to say right now. So enjoy a clip of me reading or my next update, depending on whether or not I feel like filming myself. Out on my hot girl walk of the day. That's not even a thing. I don't do that, I promise. And that's not a bad thing, actually. I probably should do that, but whatever. I'm walking right now to a bookstore to just go, like, browse, chill, whatever. But I thought I would just update on Ministry of Time. I'm probably now, like, over 200 pages in. It's really interesting. I feel like the writing of it is taking a darker turn. It's not dark, but it's darker than it was before. Because the beginning felt very, like, lighthearted, chill, silly. Now it's a little bit more serious. So, yeah, there's people. This is really embarrassing. That's kind of my assessment of the writing. I'm still enjoying the story. I feel like now that the novelty of it has worn off, it's getting a little bit more boring, but there's like, it's picking up in a different way, so I'm excited to see what happens and where the end is. I have some theories about some of the plot points, so we'll see where that ends up, but I am really enjoying it. I am still tabbing a lot of stuff about it, and yeah, overall it's just really good fun time. So yeah, that's kind of what I've got to say about it. So yeah. So as you guys saw, I did finish the Ministry of Time. There's a lot of tabs in here. You will also notice how it started out pretty in rainbow, and then as it kept going on, got more and more dark, and that's just because I ran out of all my tab colors basically and needed to replace them with other ones. But fret not, because when I get home and I get access to my tabs again, all of these dark tab colors are going to be replaced by like the right color. I just didn't have enough of the colors, so yeah. Safe to say this book was a 5-star immediately after I finished it. Like, it was really, really beautiful. I loved the writing of it. I loved the storytelling elements. I think I was watching Haley Pham talk about this after I finished it. I'd seen that video before, but I hadn't read the book yet, and so it didn't fully make sense to me, everything she was saying. But now that I finished it, I went back and rewatched her talking about it, and it just makes sense to me that I loved it as much as she did. There's so many good elements about this, but the thing that I most connected to in the story, I think, is like having an immigrant parent, kind of, and, you know, growing up as like a white passing person with an interesting racial makeup, I guess, is how I would describe it. And I related to that personally, so that made the connection to the characters feel deeper for me, I guess. But I know not everyone has that same level of connection that I probably would because of that element. However, I think that literally anyone could enjoy this book. The time travel elements are so fun, and it's hard to describe, actually. This, I don't have many words to talk about this, to be honest. There were a lot of really beautiful themes in this book, and I loved the message of it, and the story I also loved. It was very interesting, it made me laugh out loud a lot. You saw me at the end. I was, you know, this review is gonna make literally like no sense, just because I don't know how to make sense of this and tell you about it with other than just telling you to read it. Like, genuinely, I finished it and I just sat there for a while. Then I spent an hour watching interviews from this author talking about this book. And then I went and recommended it to like everyone I know on the face of this planet. So that's all I'm gonna say, because I literally don't know what else to say. The writing was beautiful, spectacular. I mean, okay, the amount of tabs I have in here should be an advertisement to how much I love this book, because some people, they can just they tab a lot of stuff. Me personally, most of my books that are tabbed don't have this many tabs, So this is insane. This is an advertisement in and of itself that you should read it, is the fact that I put this many tabs in a single book. Like, genuinely, the last book that I tabbed this much was Happy Place by Emily Henry, and I think this one might be more tabbed, so read it, please. Yeah, that's kind of all I have to say. So let's do a wrap-up of everything I read in this video, shall we? So the first book that I finished was The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. I ended up giving this one 3.75 stars. It was very hauntingly beautiful. The descriptions were amazing. I love how she writes a bunch of different characters' stories and then brings them all together and shows how they intersect and how they affect each other, and and I think the main theme of this book was showing how people can be good people and do bad things, and kind of dwelling on the question, does that make them a bad person if they do something bad, even if it was kind of with a good intention, or even if they are kind of inherently good people but they do something bad, does that make them a bad person? And I think there's a lot of questions about that, about sense of self of someone who would do something bad. And overall, it was just very beautifully written. It did not have a very punch-packing ending, which is the reason why I didn't rate it super high, because it brought up some interesting philosophical questions, but it didn't really hammer home a message by the end. I think you kind of have to think on the book to get anything out of it. That's kind of how I felt with this book, is as you go along, everything just feels like it fits together and makes sense, and you kind of see where it's going to end up before you get there. So it doesn't feel surprising at the end or anything, but it does bring up some really interesting topics. But you do have to think about it after the fact to get anything out of those topics. So yeah, that is kind of my review of this one, but I did only end up giving it 3.75. It was a little bit of a letdown compared to Sea of Tranquility, in my opinion, because that book was really good and this one was but I still enjoyed it. I would still recommend it to someone if they're interested in reading it. I would say go for it, but I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, and it wasn't my personal favorite thing ever, but it was still beautifully written and very engaging and overall pretty good. Then I read One Dark Window, which I ended up giving a 4.25 stars. This one I have a lot of mixed feelings about, just because it was described as being a gothic fantasy. In my opinion, it's not anything unusual. This just kind of felt like any fantasy you could read. It feels to me a lot like a YA romantasy, but written in an adult style, if that makes sense. Because I feel like a lot of adult fantasies carry certain assumptions about how it's going to be written and what the plot's going to be like, but I feel like the plot of this very much gave YA fantasy, but the writing was very much adult fantasy, which I thought was kind of an interesting mix, but I didn't think it was all that special. If I had known that before starting this, I probably would not have included this in this video, just because it doesn't actually feel like something out of my reading comfort zone. I would just read this for fun, because it's just fantasy. But I found it very engaging and interesting. I kept wanting to know what was going to happen, but at the same time I feel like there was not much happening. I just really loved the magic system of this world. That was super intriguing to me, but everything else was kind of predictable and not super special or interesting or surprising. There were not really any plot twists, in my opinion, because when you get to that point, it doesn't feel like a plot twist anymore, because the book feels like it's been building to that, if that makes sense. So yeah, it kind of just didn't pack a punch for me personally, but it was a very engaging story, and I do want to continue it and finish the duology to see what's gonna happen, because if you've read it, you kind of know it ends on a little bit of a cliffhanger, and I want to know what's gonna end up happening. But yeah, I would recommend this to anyone. I would not advertise it as being the best fantasy I've ever read or anything super special other than the unique magic system. But if the magic system of this sounds interesting to you, then I would say totally give it a read, because it was really engaging and fun to read about. And yeah, but it was not really a 5-star or anything magical for me personally. Then obviously we have The Ministry of Time, which I gave 5 stars, and is just such a beautiful story. It has a beautiful message. It has a lot of really fun scenes. I will say, if you've read this book and you really liked it, read Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel, this book and that book give me the exact same vibes. The plots are very different, but they both have kind of this time travel element, and along with that come a lot of like moral questions, and they both encompass a broad set of genres in my opinion. So I would say if you enjoyed this one, read that one. They're not the exact same, but they have some overlapping ideas, and the feeling you would get when reading this is the same as the feeling you would get when reading Sea of Tranquility. So yeah, that is my final thought about this book. Literally just read it. I'm recommending this to you as much as I possibly can because hello. Anyways, those were the 3 books that I read in this video. Let me know if you read any of them, share your thoughts, and give me any other recommendations based on me loving Ministry of Time, because I would love that. And I would say overall this video was a partial success in getting me out of my genre comfort zone. Obviously this one was not really out of my genre comfort zone, but the other 2 kind of were, and 3.75 and 5, so pretty decent. I would say it's always nice to read out of your genre comfort zone because you get to find other books that you maybe otherwise would not have read that you absolutely love. And I also just think it's nice to switch things up a little from time to time. So that is my assessment of all of these books, and I hope you enjoyed. I hope you have a nice day, and I will see you soon.